Nobody told you what was really inside. The headlines said cars. The clickbait said shock. The thumbnails showed dust and velvet rope and the silhouette of a man who stopped being just a man sometime around 1983 and became something the 20th century had never quite produced before and has never quite managed to produce again. But here is what nobody told you. The cars were not the discovery. The cars were the distraction. What was actually found inside Michael Jackson's sealed garage at Neverland Ranch when investigators finally breached that door in 2024 was something that rewrites the story of who he was, what he was building toward in the final years of his life, and what the world lost on the morning of June 25, 2009, in a way that no biography, no documentary, no trial transcript, and no obituary has ever come close to capturing. This is not the story you have already heard. This is the story that was locked inside a room for 15 years because the man who built that room understood something that almost no one at his level of fame ever figures out in time. The most important things you will ever create are the ones you never show anyone. And when investigators opened that garage, they did not find a collection. They found a life. A complete, fully realized, heartbreakingly detailed private life that had been running parallel to the public one the entire time, invisible to everyone, preserved in darkness with the same obsessive precision that Michael Jackson brought to every single thing he ever decided mattered. Neverland Ranch in the years following Jackson's death became one of the strangest pieces of real estate in American history, a place that existed in a kind of permanent suspended state between monument and ruin, between shrine and liability. The main house had been stripped by estate sales and legal proceedings. The carnival rides had corroded into abstract metal sculptures beneath the California weather. The animal enclosures stood empty, their inhabitants long relocated to sanctuaries and zoos across the state. The famous clock at the entrance, which Jackson had reportedly ordered stopped at a specific time as a private gesture whose meaning he never explained to anyone, had finally run down on its own and never been restarted. Journalists who managed to get access to the property in the years following his death described walking through spaces that felt cinematically abandoned, rooms where the furniture had been removed but the wallpaper remained, hallways where the carpet still held the impressions of foot traffic from years earlier, a kitchen where the calendar on the wall had never been changed past a month in 2008. Everything visible about Neverland communicated the same message. Time had stopped here. But in one specific location on the property, time had not simply stopped. Time had been deliberately engineered and architecturally sealed. The garage behind the main house was not an accident of preservation. It was a vault, constructed with specifications that went far beyond anything a storage facility would require. Fitted with climate control systems sophisticated enough to maintain museum-quality environmental conditions indefinitely, secured with a locking mechanism that would ultimately defeat every specialist sent to open it for the better part of a full day in 2024. This structure had been designed by a man who intended whatever was inside it to survive. Not for years, for generations. The question that no one could answer in the 15 years between Jackson's death and the moment that door finally opened was devastatingly simple. Survive for whom? The legal audit that finally forced the opening of the garage in 2024 was not motivated by curiosity or by any romantic notion of completing the historical record. It was motivated by money and by the kind of sustained financial and legal pressure that estate disputes generate when they extend across more than a decade without full resolution. Court orders had been issued. Compliance was not optional. The team assembled to carry out the opening included locksmiths, archivists, estate representatives, legal observers, and preservation specialists, none of whom had any particular expectation of finding anything beyond what decades of rumor had suggested, which was cars, memorabilia, and perhaps some personal effects too intimate or too legally complicated to have been included in earlier estate proceedings. What the team encountered before they even got the door open should have told them that their expectations were inadequate. The door resisted everything. The keypad had failed completely, its internal circuitry destroyed either by time or by a fail-safe mechanism that had been deliberately engineered to trigger after a specific period of inactivity, ensuring that casual or unauthorized access would be effectively impossible. The door material itself, a custom alloy composite that later analysis determined to be significantly more dense and impact-resistant than standard commercial security materials, defeated cutting equipment that had never failed its operators before. The hinge assembly offered no exploitable weakness. The frame offered none either. Specialists who had between them opened everything from corporate server rooms to evidence lockers in active criminal investigations stood in front of this garage door and ran out of ideas. It took them until late afternoon. When the door finally gave way, it did so with a sound that everyone present would later describe using the same word without having compared notes. Reluctant, as if something on the other side had been holding on. The smell reached them before the sight did. 15 years of sealed, climate-controlled air, carrying the specific and unmistakable combination of aged leather, machine oil, and the faint chemical sweetness of preservation compounds that had been running continuously inside that space since the last time Michael Jackson himself had closed the door and walked away. Then the flashlights went in, and the room revealed itself. And the first thing that struck every person present was not any individual object, but the arrangement. This was not a storage space. Storage spaces have the casual disorder of things put away without ceremony. This room had the deliberate geometry of an installation, of a space organized by someone who intended it to be found and understood in a specific sequence. The vehicles were positioned in a line that moved from left to right across the garage floor, and that line, as archivists would later confirm after cross-referencing acquisition records and personal timelines, was chronological. The cars were arranged in the order in which they had entered Michael Jackson's life. The collection began on the left with the earliest acquisition and ended on the right with the most recent, and walking that line from one end to the other was, the archival team would later write in their formal report, like reading an autobiography written in a language that had no words, only objects and the weight of what they represented to the person who had chosen them. On the far wall, visible only at a specific angle when the flashlight beams crossed it correctly, for words in faded gold paint that Jackson had apparently applied himself at some point during the garage's construction or early use. Drive your dreams. Not a decorator's addition. Not a contractor's finishing touch. A private inscription in a private room that was never meant for any audience. Which means those 4 words were written for exactly one person. And that person had been dead for 15 years when anyone else finally read them. The automobile collection itself, examined in the chronological sequence Jackson had arranged it in, told a story that no interviewer had ever managed to extract from him directly because no interviewer had ever known to ask the right questions. The 1985 Rolls-Royce Corniche on the far left end of the line was turquoise, an unusual and striking color choice for a vehicle from a manufacturer whose clients historically favored discretion. And its interior held a detail that stopped the archival team completely when they opened the driver's door and pointed a flashlight at the dashboard. The cassette deck was still loaded. The tape inside, partially ejected as if someone had reached for it and then changed their mind or been interrupted, was labeled in Jackson's own handwriting. Off the wall, the tape was paused at 11 minutes and 40 seconds, a position that placed it precisely within the final, most emotionally stripped-down moments of She's Out of My Life, the song Jackson could not record without weeping, the song that his producer Quincy Jones chose to release with the tears audible, because removing them would have removed the only thing about the recording that was completely and undeniably real. A pause button pressed at that exact second, in a car bought during the most professionally triumphant period of his life, in a room he never showed anyone, said more about the interior experience of being Michael Jackson than anything he ever said in public. Moving right along the chronological line, the vehicles hardened. A 1954 Cadillac Fleetwood built for presidents spoke to ambition calcifying into legacy. A Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud, one of fewer than 500 ever made, arrived during the perfectionism of the bad era. A bulletproof Mercedes-Benz 500 SEL with its doors still taped arrived at the moment when the legal walls began closing in. And, at the far right end of the line, the most recent acquisition and the most revealing object in the entire automotive collection, a matte black Rolls-Royce Phantom 6 with no rear windows. Not tinted windows. No windows at all. The rear compartment had been fitted instead with high-definition interior screens. The person inside could see everything. Nothing outside could see in. This car had been commissioned in the months following the 2005 acquittal. It was the vehicle of a man who had decided that visibility itself had become the enemy. But the cars, for all the biographical weight they carried, were not what broke the composure of the archival team. What broke their composure was a Ford van. A 1993 Ford Econoline, beige, completely unmarked, the kind of vehicle that exists specifically to go unnoticed, tucked into the darkest corner of the garage, as if hidden within the hiding place. The exterior communicated nothing. The interior communicated everything. The walls were lined in deep blue velvet. The seats were custom leather, with integrated personal monitors. A Super Nintendo Entertainment System was mounted and hardwired at the center console, its cartridge library organized in labeled compartments with a precision that suggested the organization had been important to whoever maintained it. A mirrored ceiling panel ran the full length of the cabin, and in a side compartment, beneath a folded square of the same blue velvet, a notebook. The notebook is what changed the tenor of the entire investigation, because the notebook was not about cars or tours or music or any of the things that Michael Jackson was publicly known to care about. The notebook contained 43 pages of illustrated text for a children's book he had been writing alone, in secret, in a van, in a sealed garage, for an unknown number of years. The book had a title on its cover in his handwriting, Where Do the Stars Sleep? No one had ever heard of it. No collaborator mentioned it. No assistant referenced it. No family member knew it existed. It had been created in total privacy and kept in total privacy and would have remained in total privacy forever if a court order had not forced a door open in 2024. Beside the children's book pages, the notebook also contained stage designs of extraordinary ambition and technical specificity, sketched and annotated with a kind of detail that communicated not daydreaming but active planning, a mind genuinely working through engineering problems in the margins of its own creative journal late at night in a blue velvet van in a sealed California garage, while the rest of the world believed it knew exactly what Michael Jackson was doing and thinking and feeling. The black crates behind the tarpaulin near the rear wall were the last thing the team examined, and they were the thing that finally explained why the garage had been built the way it had been built, sealed the way it had been sealed, and protected with the kind of engineering intensity that had defeated specialists for the better part of a day. The crates bore the gold MJJ Productions logo. They had been sealed with industrial fasteners and covered with deliberate care. Inside them were blueprints, fully engineered architectural and production schematics for a concert tour that had never been announced, never been referenced, and never been rumored in 15 years of exhaustive posthumous examination of every known aspect of Jackson's professional life and creative output. The primary archival folder containing the documents was labeled on its exterior in capital letters in blue ink. History 2. The Resurrection Tour. The designs inside that folder were not preliminary. They were complete. Multi-tiered mechanized stage platforms engineered to reconfigure their geometry in real time during live performance without any interruption to the show. Ground-level audience display systems designed to make 80,000-person stadiums experientially intimate. Atmospheric projection systems capable of replacing the visible ceiling of any enclosed arena with a fully immersive visual environment specified to change dynamically with the performance. Environmental simulation systems pushing beyond what production technology of the era could reliably deliver at the described scale. And throughout all of it, in the margins of every page, handwritten annotations revealing the single intention behind every technical specification. One note beside a diagram of an automated reconfiguring stage floor. They will feel like they are inside the music. He was not designing a concert. He was designing the dissolution of the boundary between the person performing and the people watching, an experience engineered to make the audience not observers of something happening in front of them, but inhabitants of something happening around them and through them. The tour was never announced because the tour never happened. The door was closed. The crates went behind the tarpaulin. The blueprints stayed exactly where he left them, preserved at precisely the right temperature and humidity for 15 years, waiting in a darkness so complete and so intentional that it took a court order and a full day of failed attempts to finally bring them into the light. What the Jackson estate decided to do with the contents of the garage after the audit was completed was the detail that perhaps revealed more about the nature of what had been found than any single object inside the space. The decision, delivered firmly and without elaboration to every auction house, museum, exhibition organizer, and media outlet that made an inquiry in the weeks following the discovery, was a single word: nothing. Nothing would be sold. Nothing would be exhibited. Nothing would be loaned, licensed, reproduced, or made available in any form for any purpose at any price. The garage would be resealed. A comprehensive archival inventory would be completed and maintained privately. The climate systems would be upgraded and monitored. Every item would remain in precisely the position and condition in which Michael Jackson had chosen to leave it. The estate statement, when pressed for elaboration, offered only that the contents of the garage represented a private dimension of Jackson's life and work that he had clearly and deliberately chosen to protect, and that protecting it remained the appropriate response. No further comment was offered. No timeline for any future decision was suggested. The door, in other words, was closed again, this time with full knowledge of what was behind it, which made the closing of it mean something entirely different than it had meant for the previous 15 years. For 15 years, the door had been closed because no one could open it. Now the door was closed because the people responsible for what was inside had looked at all of it carefully and decided that some things are not made more meaningful by being seen. Some things are made more meaningful by being kept. Michael Jackson spent his entire adult life being the most watched human being on the planet, performing for audiences that numbered in the billions across a career that lasted more than 4 decades. He understood visibility and its costs more completely than perhaps any other person who has ever lived. And in the one space he built entirely for himself, with specifications he designed personally and security he engineered with professional assistance, the thing he chose to put was not the performance. It was the person. The cassette tape paused at the moment of maximum vulnerability. The children's book written for no audience. The blueprints for a show no one would ever see. The inscription on the wall written for a room that was never going to have visitors. Drive your dreams. He did. In private. In the dark. In a sealed garage on a ranch that the world thought it had finished with. And the most extraordinary thing about everything found behind that door is not any individual object or any specific revelation. It is the cumulative evidence, overwhelming and quiet at the same time, that the version of Michael Jackson the world spent 50 years watching was not the whole story. It was not even the most interesting part.